Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name's Radha Priti, and I'm here with this live audience that I'm so happy joins us every morning. And we are going to talk about the Gita. We've been talking about the soul, learning about the soul from the Gita worldview. And we are in chapter 2, text 22. And I say we get right into it. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. So we're going to start with chapter 2, text 22. This is day 16, by the way. Wow, day 16. I think that means 2 months. Doesn't that mean 2 months? We've been at it for a while. So verse 22 says, as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. So I think I've actually used this analogy before, just in talking about the soul, this analogy of clothes. And the transition of a soul to a new body is like the changing of clothes. The clothes being a tool for functioning. And this conveys like a natural routineness of the change. It doesn't seem natural or routine to us, but really in the wide scheme of things, if we zoom way out, it's really just a cycle, and it is a natural change, just like the changing of clothes. When you get up in the morning, you put on a new outfit. When you go to bed, you take it off. Wake up in the morning, put on a new outfit, go to bed, put it off. This is just another version of that cycle that's zoomed way out. And when we talk about what kind of body a soul chooses, and again, if you're not quite ready for, or even like if you don't even buy into this worldview and you're like, reincarnation, not for me, that's okay. You could still, hear about it, learn about it, and then decide whether or not you really buy into it. And you can still benefit from the teachings of the Gita, even if that's not where you are, and that's just fine. But we'll talk about it just to kind of learn what the philosophy says, and then everybody can decide if it's something that they buy into or not. And you don't have to buy into it to benefit from the Gita. So, but yeah, when we talk about a soul choosing a body, there's two things that are considered when a soul's choosing a new body. And this is kind of like, I've also talked a lot about the body being a vehicle. So we can use that analogy. We could also use the analogy of like a house, a vehicle or a house analogy. Hi, Karina. When we talk about the soul choosing a new body, and those things that it considers is, what do I want? What are my desires? And what can I afford? Right? If any of us go to buy a new car or a new house, those are two pretty big things that we consider. What do I want? And what can I afford? So after a lifetime for the body, and it falls down and the soul is free to go wherever it wants. Similarly, where it chooses to go depends on those two things. We call it kama, which is desires. So whatever, like if in this lifetime you have, say, like a really big sex attachment, like you're really attached to sex, you'll get a body that's conducive to that, like a monkey body. And that's just, again, like wherever your consciousness is, your soul is going to choose a body that's suited to that. That's just like a logical thing. It's, if we think of the body like a tool. So wherever your consciousness is, wherever your really strong desires lie, you get a body suited to that. So that's one thing. The other thing is what you deserve. We call this your karma. And karma is like a mainstream word now that we use, to say that for every action or every offering we put into the universe, we get something similar back. And this kind of the similar concept of karma. It's that we have a stockpile of unprocessed actions. So for all the things that we've done in this life, and even things that we've done in past lives, there's a stockpile that exists of reactions to those things. And it doesn't always happen right away. You could still have a stockpile of karma from things that you did in your past life that you don't even know about. which is like sometimes how we explain like why a person is born blind, or things that happen in this life that you're just like, it was such a good person, how did that happen to them? We all have these stockpiles of karma that have accumulated over lifetimes, sorry, and things are being drawn out of it at different times, and we don't always know or understand or can make sense of it because we don't have that whole picture of all of our life schemes. So we just have to trust that's how the karma is being distributed. And sometimes we see it in our own lives. I mean, sometimes it's very obvious what kind of energy we put out, we see that we return, and that also, that we see that. So that's much easier to understand. But on a broader scale, it also happens such. So we all have a stockpile of unprocessed actions, and you'll get body suited to this. So if you do really pious deeds in this life, if you're a really good person, if you give a lot of charity, if you follow dharma, you come back and materially speaking, you'll be you'll be set up in a nice situation. You'll maybe be born to a family of really pious people, or maybe you'll be less prone to disease, things like that. So we'll go back to the analogy of the two birds sitting in the tree. If we remember that analogy, the two birds sitting in the tree represent the Paramatma, super soul, God in the heart, and then also our individual soul, right? And if we remember, our individual soul is eating the fruits of the tree. And the Paramatma, the master, the God in the heart, he's just watching. And they're friends, these two birds. But one is the master and one is the servant. And the reason that we come back and take material bodies is because we've forgotten this fundamental relationship. Right? We've forgotten this fundamental relationship. We've oftentimes decided that we're the master, and that we're all these, like we talked about, these little mini controllers, these little mini gods running around. And we've lost that element of surrender to something bigger. And in that, we have to come back to this material world and learn these lessons. And if we start to really get conscious of what's going on around us, we notice the things in our life constantly teaching us these lessons. And the sooner that we can learn them and get through them and come back to that fundamental relationship, the sooner that we can liberate our soul from this material bondage, from being so attached to these material things around us that we know don't give us enduring happiness, though they may give us some amount of temporary pleasure. So that's kind of the game we're playing in this material existence, or this material matrix, is we're put in here, and we're confronted with all of these different challenges and obstacles, with the goal being to understand our true identity, and to come back to that relationship with divinity, with a higher power, and to surrender our grasp on our material attachments and material identities. And once we can reinstore that, we understand that we're not God, that we serve God, then we can be liberated, and we can go back and enjoy with God eternally. So there's this excerpt from the Upanishad, which is where this analogy is from, that I wanted to read because I just thought it was beautiful. It says, although the two birds are in the same tree, the eating bird is fully engrossed with anxiety and moroseness as the enjoyer of the fruits of the tree. But if in some way or other he turns to his friend, the Lord, and knows glories, at once the suffering bird becomes free from all anxieties. So that's kind of like the secret code to get out of this cycle of birth and death. That's kind of like what we need. Until then, we're on this hamster wheel, and we're governed by these material laws, which is, again, our desires and our karma. Whatever that is, that will determine where we end up next. Until we can crack the code, and until we can figure it out, and then we can be liberated from that hamster wheel. And we don't have to continue on in that cycle of birth and death. And the idea is that as we go to the lower species, there's less capacity to enjoy, and our consciousness is lower. There's also less capacity to realize God. But as we go to higher species, there's more. But there is kind of a trick, because when you go so high, there's so much capacity to enjoy that it's almost like harder to feel a need for God, because you're enjoying so much in these like heavenly planets where there's no fear, and there's no, all the things that ail us here don't so much exist. So actually the earth, they say the earth is like the best birth, because it gives us that opportunity. We have our consciousness is able to understand and to seek spiritual guidance and relationship with divinity. But at the same time, there's enough distress here that we seek God and that relationship. We have this need for it, and in that, it's a good. This is like the starting ground. This is where we can, the launching pad to really uh, get to that relationship, that ultimate relationship with God. So, but this, back to this bird analogy, Arjuna and Krishna, or no, this bird analogy represents Arjuna and Krishna. When Arjuna surrendered to Krishna, if you remember, that was just a few verses ago, 2:7, when Arjuna says, "I'm bewildered, I've lost all sense of what to do. I'm your disciple. I'm surrendered to you. Please instruct me." That's exactly where that happened for Arjuna. And this can also happen to us. And it has for a lot of us, which is why a lot of us are here. We've realized that like what we're equipped with in this material world, our skills, our talents, are even like how the way that we know to deal with things hasn't always worked out for us. The things that we thought would bring us happiness hasn't always worked out for us. And we need something bigger. We need something more meaningful. We need more purpose in our lives. And a lot of us are coming to that place where we're ready to kind of peek behind that curtain and see, is there something more? Is there something bigger that can hold me and bring me higher levels of happiness and fulfillment, because I just have not experienced that here in this material world. So the soul is spiritual functioning and the world is material. So for functioning, the soul needs the material body. It's like when humans go to space and they need a spacesuit. That's just like our tool to get around here. All human beings exist, and humans alone, in the human species of bodies, we ask why we exist. And this question is the engine for spiritual inquiry and spiritual growth. So that's why the human body is much superior to like an animal body, because we're capable of asking this question, and animals aren't. And the pure soul longs for the eternal, but this longing is covered by layers of impurities. And we talked about that before too. Whenever we engross ourselves, engross our consciousness in material endeavors, whenever we put material endeavors ahead of spiritual endeavors, we prioritize this material body over our spiritual identities. We accumulate this covering, this on our soul, that we lose touch with what our real longing is, what our real identity is. So it's like, people say you are what you eat. That's what happens to our consciousness. Whatever we put it in, that's what we become. That's what we become focused on. And that becomes the covering of our soul. And that covering of our soul, it inhibits it from being able to, it makes it forget its actual identity. So we all have human body now, but we're depending on karma, which is what we deserve, and kama, which is our desires. And we'll go up and down through human bodies to animal bodies. But we can even take birth as demigods, actually, if we accumulate enough pious credits. But even if we take birth as a demigod, we have to come back down on earth to liberate our souls. Because again, when we go up that high, it's not conducive to that desire for reconnection with the earth, or with divinity, because we're too engrossed in material pleasures, because there are so many material pleasures. So when we talk about life, we have the means and the meaning of life. Means of life is like the things I need to survive, like shelter, food, a certain amount of emotional support, like just these things that we absolutely need to survive. The meaning of life is what we're here talking about, right? Our recovering our identity as a spirit soul, and in that understanding that our job is to serve the whole and not to be the whole. And that's how we actually get lasting happiness and purpose in life. But sometimes what happens is that the meaning of life becomes the means, right? Like if you get real so into making money that you just see money coming in, money coming in, money coming in, and you're like, this is my purpose of life, to make money. We've even seen like correlations of people that make a lot of money, their happiness goes up to a certain extent, and then it actually starts going back down, right? Because there is a certain extent that we need to like be comfortable in this material life, and we need to so that our minds can be peaceful. But after we hit that place where our minds can be peaceful, where we have enough means, we actually need to start pursuing higher purposes in life to continue that evolution of consciousness, for our happiness to continue to go up. And if we don't, then actually all that material stuff just starts to get in the way, and we start to develop anxiety or fear over losing it. And that starts to take up space in our mind. And then our mind just becomes full of anxiety and fear, which we know how that makes all of us feel, right? So we have to be careful with that, confusing the means for the meaning, because that can easily happen to us. And then we just get further bound by material attachments because we become afraid of losing them. But so in humans, again, we have the capacity to differentiate between the means and the meanings. And this is where sensory discipline comes in. It can help us from getting too confused in that concept of means and meanings. Like say you are somebody that makes a ton of money. One thing that's really easy to do when you make a ton of money is you get kind of, what is that, caught up with the Joneses or something. Life becomes about, having a better car than your next door neighbor, or the things that you wear, or just all these material things. That becomes, you become just kind of caught up in it, and there's no end to it. It never ends, right? It's like you can just keep going with acquiring things and better qualities and better statuses, and then that becomes it. So we have to kind of like figure out for each of us in our own lives where these lines in the sand need to be, right? I know this happened to my husband in his past marriage. My husband has been married before, and his wife made a ton of money. She's like a president of like Allstate Corporation or something. And he said that this happened, and it kind of like broke his heart, and he didn't really even know it was happening to them, but just like their lifestyles just kept growing and growing because their friend circles kept, growing and growing. And in that, they had something to prove, and they kind of lost touch of like the actual important things in life. So if we're not careful, this happens with money, but this can happen with anything. This can happen with anything that we get sense gratification out of. It can happen with alcohol. It can happen with food. It can happen with television shows. If we don't like recognize that we have a natural inclination to like maybe get a little too into that, and in that, before we know it, it's what's filling our consciousness. It's what's driving our motivations. And that's why we have this sensory discipline. It's not because it's like you're a bad person if you drink alcohol, but it's like, okay, I've recognized that if I start to drink alcohol, I start to drink a lot of alcohol, and that doesn't really end up well for me. And so it's better to stop it here than to even allow it to continue on. And there might be different things. Again, are different things that we all struggle with that are like our go-to comforts, or we talked about this before too. But this is why in spiritual life, it's important to identify and to have these lines in the sands that we know we're not going to go past. Like I know I'm not going to get a new car until this one runs down. I'm not going to get into the game of buying new cars every 2 years so that I can have the latest and greatest. I'm just not even going to entertain that. Or whatever it is. I've talked about Netflix before. I'm going to watch 1 hour of Netflix instead of 6 because I know what ends up happening to my consciousness when I get there. And I don't want my consciousness to be full of these material attachments. So that's a tall order for us all in our spiritual lives to one, kind of confront ourselves honestly about where our lines in the sand need to be, and then to do it, to say, okay, this spiritual life is important enough for me to do it. But we don't do it because it's like you're a bad person if you do XYZ. We do it because, again, we recognize that it's filling our consciousness and it's not bringing us higher. And it's just, so therefore it's just not aligned with the direction that we want to go. And that's why we do it. So that's sensory. That's kind of where the sensory discipline fits into this big picture of spiritual life. That's why we do it as spiritualists. When we talk about bodily consciousness, we can talk about consciousness only of the body, or we can view it, the consciousness of the body, as a tool. So when we have consciousness only of the body, again, we can get consumed in our ego. Like, I don't know if any of you guys watch reality TV. My husband and I like this Love is Blind show. We like, talk about the relationships and the people. And anyway, what we notice after all these people go through Love is Blind is they all get, like, afterwards, they all get really beautiful. Most of the time they're beautiful before, but afterwards they get even more beautiful. They get even more skinny. They get even more, all the standards of beauty, whatever it's supposed to be. They become that. And it's like they become so conscious of their body. And then we like to apply this word healthy to it. Oh, this is healthy. But it's like, where's your consciousness in that? Are you doing all these changes to your body because your ego is so into it? Because now you're so in the spotlight that everybody's seeing you and criticizing you, and therefore you want to look perfect. So then you're making your body like that. And then again, culturally, we stick this word healthy on it. Like, oh, now I have a healthy relationship. It's like, all right, where's your relationship with yourself, with your consciousness? Are you so obsessed over the body now because now you're overly identified with it, right? That's what's actually driving this. And maybe not for all of them, but I just, this is something that could happen. It happens to all of us, right? I think it's happened to me my whole life. Is like, oh, I'm not pretty enough. I'm not, this enough. Okay, I better diet or do this so that I can be more attractive. But it's what we're doing there is we're just overly identifying with the body. Again, we want to be healthy. We want our bodies to be healthy, but we want the body to be healthy to support the soul, knowing that the body is a vehicle for the soul. It's like a temple of the soul. And that's why we want it to be healthy and to take care of it, not so that we can become more bonded to our material attachments, or more engrossed in our egos, which is this self-centered mentality that I'm the center and I need sense gratification for my happiness, and this is how I'm going to get it. We don't want to do that because we all know it doesn't really bring us happiness, right? So we have to be careful and we have to be honest with ourselves about where we are and why we're doing it. So the approach to the body, it can be, I care only for the body. It can be, I don't care at all for the body. Or the middle can be, I care for the body so that I care better for the soul. And that's where we all want to aspire to be. And that takes like an honest inventory assessment of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Right. Does anybody want to add to that or share a personal experience with that before we move on? This body consciousness, it can, yeah.
I don't know that it's a fully formed thought, but I was just thinking about what you were saying. From one of the spiritual texts that speaks about the eyes of man are never satisfied. It's like when we're in our egoic identification, we're never satisfied. And so we're always striving. And it just sounds like in what you're speaking to this morning, how important it is to know why I'm here. Like, what's my purpose? If my purpose or my idea for my life is to reveal that divinity that is within me, then I'll make different choices. I won't get caught in what you were speaking about, sense gratification. But if I don't have any purpose and I'm just flailing around for direction, then can be easily consumed in sense gratification. I can say that that's happened many times. An example of it isn't, fresh on my mind, where it's just, I just want to get more, have more, be more, hang out with the right people, have the right message, and all of those things. And I can say that that feels hollow and empty. But when I'm aligned with, the idea that I'm living for the presence and its experience through me, then I have a whole different experience of life. That's what I was thinking about when you were sharing. And thank you. I really love what's being said this morning.
Yeah, you just encapsulated it all. Like whether it's we're investing in, we're getting caught up in how much money we have or how beautiful we are, whatever it is, it might serve us to a certain spot. But then once we pass that place of what's actually necessary for supporting the soul, it's going to start bringing us down. Even you see both the prettiest people start getting depressed, or because it's this mentality, it's their consciousness. It's that's just not being cultivated to that connection with divinity, and it's being cultivated in an egotistical way, and we all know that will just drag us down. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we can go to 223. The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. So the soul is indestructible. And now we're at verse 23, chapter 223. But the first part of 23, 11 through 15, we talked about tolerance. And then in 16 through 21, we talked about non-doership. And then in 22 through 30, now we're talking about non-lamentation. So it's telling us that the soul cannot be cut by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by wind. Therefore, don't lament. The soul is eternal. And the Gita talks about the soul's indestructibility from different perspectives. This is kind of what we're going to go into now. So piercing, burning, eroded, withered, all the ways that the body can be destroyed, but this has no effect on the soul. And our souls, the soul, the bird, we have the two birds. One is the Paramatma, the super soul, God in the heart, and the other is our individual soul. That soul is an eternally separated part of the supreme soul. And because they are atomic individual souls eternally, they're prone to being covered by the illusionary energy and thus become separated from the association of God. Just like as sparks of a fire, although they're one in quality with the fire, they're prone to be extinguished when they're outside of the fire. That same kind of thing happens to our soul. So the soul's indestructibility implies that the soul aspires for a destiny far bigger than merely bodily survival, which is also impossible beyond the soul's finite lifespan. But the soul's destiny is liberation to eternal life. And ideally, we take care of our body and our loved ones' bodies while pursuing spiritual liberation. But when we're talking about what's happening in the Gita right now, this emergency situation requires Arjuna to choose between bodily survival and soul's evolution. But the soul's indestructibility implies that we prioritize the soul's evolution or elevation over the body's protection. And so this is the lesson that we take from this. It doesn't imply that we can indiscriminately destroy anybody's body, like we've talked about. It just implies that we prioritize the soul's evolution over the body's protection. So even when we're taking care of our body, we're doing it to support, to make sure this vehicle runs smoothly and nicely to support the soul. It's like, I don't know, I chant, like I meditate. And before I was pregnant, I had a much easier time meditating because my body was much more comfortable. So my mind could be a lot more peaceful. Now I realize that I struggle more. It's harder for me to focus for long periods of time because I become uncomfortable. But so that's why we want to take care of the body. Now, I'm pregnant, so I can't really do anything about that necessarily. But in terms of like the health of our body, that's why we want it to be, we want to have a certain amount of, fitness, and we want to be able to, that's why they practice yoga in the day, so they could sit and for long periods of time and meditate without being interrupted or what's that word? Interrupted, distracted. Thank you. Distracted by the body. That's why we really want it to be healthy and to be so that we can use it for these spiritual practices. So how do we view the body? As a vital tool for the soul to progress towards realizing its eternality. And the body is also an abode of the divine. We take care of it by good hygiene and healthcare, and by using it for our social responsibilities in a mood of devotional service. And by doing that, we can gradually realize that our body is actually a temple of God. So it's not like we just throw the body away, who cares? It's like, no, it's actually, we respect the body, we take care of it, we cherish the body, but we don't get attached to the body from like an ego perspective, like this is mine and it's here forever. And we understand the context of the body and the bigger purpose that it serves. And that kind of a fun fact I read when I was studying this, in the Mahabharata, Bhima, who's Arjuna's brother, he refuses to step over the body of a monkey, which kind of shows like, people really respected bodies. It wasn't like just, oh, who cares? It's a body. Soul's really what's important. Who cares about the body? No, the body is important. He refuses to step over the body of the monkey because he considered it to be disrespectful. Later, that body was revealed to be Hanuman, who is, a huge character in Vedic wisdom. But yeah, so that point is important, that it's not like we just don't care. We care, but like Lisa said, we understand why we care and how we care, and that it serves the greater purpose, and we don't get confused about us being the center and we caring just because it serves us, right? That's ultimately what we're doing when we care about the body, because so that we can look hot, or we just care about ourselves. That's it. We just want to be likable or loved, or which is okay, and we all have a certain amount of that, but we don't want that to become paramount, because if it becomes paramount, then we're never going to find lasting happiness. And that's why we're all here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can move on to 224. This individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble, and can be neither burned nor dried. He is everlasting, present everywhere, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. There's a lot of descriptive words here. We'll break down each one of them. So first we start with the soul is present everywhere. This doesn't mean that the soul is all pervading. It doesn't mean that like my soul pervades everywhere. The soul is localized to one body. It's localized to the body, but it means that the soul is capable of existing everywhere in many different kinds of bodies. So like extremophiles, is that how you say that word? They only survive, they only survive and thrive in extreme conditions. Like that's a thing, I guess. This also proves that like or I shouldn't say proves, because again, we can't really prove the existence of the soul. We can infer the existence of the soul, but this indicates that extraterrestrial life is possible. So life as we know it has not been found, but all life doesn't equal life as we know it, because the soul can exist anywhere. So that's what this verse is saying. It's implying that life can exist outside of our bodies. Not all the vehicles have to look and smell the same as these bodies that we know. The soul is capable of being present everywhere. It doesn't need a certain environment to survive. So that's what it means when it says it's present everywhere. It doesn't need a certain environment to survive. It's independent of that. So this just opens up. I mean, this could be So many species have souls that we haven't even identified or know of. Souls on other planets that we don't have the capability to reach or to connect with. The soul is unchangeable. So the soul doesn't change. What changes is the consciousness, and that keeps changing as we evolve. And the direction of the consciousness goes up as we become more selfless, more farsighted, more self-actualizing. And then it goes down as we become more selfish, more short-sighted, more self-destructive. And so that's the evolution of the soul. The soul itself is unchanging, but the consciousness, that beam of light that comes out from the soul, like we talked about, the soul's like a flashlight, and the beam of light that comes out, that's changing. In spiritual growth, it's not soul growth. It is the soul's consciousness rising towards bigger concern. And this is where the free will comes in. It's where we shine that flashlight, where we apply that flashlight. And in that's where free will comes in. And this component of free will is so important because that's the basis of spirituality, right? Is that we have free will. We can decide what we want to attach our consciousness to and what we want to develop loving relationships with, or who we want to develop loving relationships with. That's the whole point. And the whole point is that we turn to God after we're that bird in the tree trying all these different fruits, and we've tried them all and we've gotten some pleasure. We realize, I want something more. And we turn to the bird right next to us and we get out of the matrix. That's what we're doing here. And that's why this element of free will is so important. That's why it's not designed such that we're just like programmed robots that do that automatically. No, that doesn't have any real meaning, right? We all know that. We've all been in relationships. You can't force somebody to love you. You can't control somebody to love you. That's not love. That's actually lowering of the consciousness. So this free will is really important element when we're talking about love, when we're talking about rising the consciousness. It's not something that can be forced or controlled, or it's not that. It becomes something lower. The soul's immovable. It does not move from one body to another, or it does move from one body to another by desires and delusions, but it's not movable by material forces. So that's what it means when it says it's not movable in the context of how we understand things move, material forces. It moves by desires and karma. So if we have soul and mind, the soul and the mind, attachments drag the mind and the soul goes along with it for the ride. That's kind of how that relationship works there, which is again why the sensory control is so important. These lines in the sand where we say, I'm not going to let my mind even go there, because I know that when my mind goes there, my consciousness goes there, and then all of a sudden that's what my entire consciousness consists of. So that's because that's what happens. The attachments drag the mind, and then the soul goes along for the ride, and we become more forgetful of our eternal identity and what we're doing here. So liberation means that the soul is no longer caught up in the mind and that it moves its own way. It's free to really connect with divinity because it's not so attached to the mind, which, we know what happens to our minds. It's like we're all little squirrels. Just, oh, okay. Oh, oh, what's next? What's next that can make me happy, that can give me some kind of form of comfort? That's what happens to the mind. So we have to learn to control that and to turn to God in the heart. And we'll move to the next verse. If anybody wants to say anything, please do. Yeah. The next verse is 225. It is said that the soul is invisible, inconceivable, and immutable. Knowing this, you should not grieve for the body. So when we say invisible, that means the material senses can't perceive spiritual realities. We know that. That's why we have sadhana. That's why we have spiritual practices. Because material senses, they alone cannot perceive spiritual realities. Inconceivable, it's hard to catch with our intelligence and within our own conceptions. We talked about this a little bit the last time. We can't establish the existence of the soul experimentally beyond the proof of Vedic wisdom. It's just something that we have to accept. We can infer the existence of the soul, and we talked about how we do that and how we can relate to it, but it's not something that we can scientifically prove. In the same way that we have that when we're all born, we accept that we all have fathers on the authority of our mother. And now, there's lots of tests and you can actually figure out who your dad is and all that. But before that, people just accepted this was their father on the authority of their mother. We have to accept the existence of the soul on the basis of the superior authority. But again, that's not something that we just jump into and just, blind faith our way into it. We build incremental faith. And that's even how we build a secure foundation in it. We try out some of these principles and we see how it feels. And then maybe we say, wow, that was pretty transformational for me. Maybe I'll lean into it a little bit more. And over time, we see where we are. It's not something that we force. It's not something that we just jump in, because a lot of times we jump in fully and we're actually not really we're not secure in that. We just kind of said, we want to build incremental faith, and we accept that's how the process happens. So again, even if all the things you're hearing on this podcast, it's like, that is far out there, I'm not quite there. That's great. That's no problem. You don't need to be. And if you're not, and if you never are, that's also fine. But find what works for you, maybe apply it in your life and see how you feel. And trust that God in the heart will direct you according to where you are and what you need for your own evolution. So it's not that we can't think at all about it, but we can't get to a conclusive understanding merely by thinking. So we can think about the soul, we can ponder it. The discussions that we're having now, they appeal to our rationalization and that's great, but we can't conclusively understand it just by thinking. And this is why we do spiritual practice. Right? This is why our spiritual practices of meditation, of whatever your spiritual practices are. I like chanting. I say the Maha Mantra every morning. I repeat it over and over for a couple hours. And the Maha Mantra is a mantra that's just a call out to divinity. It's just different names of divinity, and it translates as, please engage me in your service. And so it's kind of also like a prayer of surrender. And in that, I feel a connection with divinity. But it's not through my intellect, and we're all here, so we've all probably experienced some kind of spiritual practice that it's just an experience. It's not something that you can intellectualize. And if you try, you just can't, right? We've all had those experiences. Maybe something we felt in a kirtan, maybe, whatever it is. And so that's the process. That's how we do that. That's how we build in. So as we study matter and we're advancing, the complexity is increasing. But with the soul, we realize by spiritual practices. That's how we realize it. And I think somebody said it last week too, that the more that you lean in, the more that you reach up, the more that you reach out and you inquire, you aspire for that connection, the more reciprocation that you feel. God in the heart will reciprocate according to how open your arms are to him. And in that, maybe he'll give you guidance in a material way. Maybe you'll feel more connected. There will be reciprocation according to your level of surrender. That's just how it works. And that's how we build the faith. So zooming back out, this analysis is centered around the theme, don't lament. If the soul is invisible, unchanging, we can't kill. So don't lament. Right? When Socrates said, when he was being sentenced to death, he said, they can't even see me. How can they catch or kill me? This great philosopher of the time had this kind of realization. We all have this core that is eternal, and that is a universal insight. So then back to the word immutable. In this description, it says the soul is immutable. This means that the soul's existence is inferred through consciousness. The external characteristic is this ensouled life, this matter, which we've talked about. The matter goes through the 6 processes of transformations. The soul does not. We have to infer the soul's existence through consciousness. So that's what immutable means. And should we do one more and then we can end for the day? Now we're at 226. If, however, you think that the soul or the symptoms of life will always be born and die forever, you still have no reason to lament. So there's theories and religions that don't believe in a separate existence of the soul beyond the body. Right? That's what's kind of being addressed here. These religions that don't believe in a separate existence of the soul beyond the body. Here, Krishna is sarcastically addressing Arjuna as mighty armed because he knew that he didn't accept that philosophy. He knew that he accepted Vedic philosophy. Because if he didn't believe in the soul's rebirth, then why would have he been afraid of the sinful reaction due to killing the others on the other side, right? That was one of his reasons that he didn't want to fight, is the sinful reactions that he would incur from killing the others on the other side. So he knows that he believes in the philosophy of reincarnation. So he was kind of just like messing with him a little bit there. So if we believe that the body, but back to this theory of the theory that the soul and the body, there's no separate existence of the soul beyond the body. If we believe that the body is just composed of just chemicals, then why would we even lament when we die? Right? If we see it, if we're just reducing ourselves to biology, why does it matter if it's just a sack of chemicals that it dies, right? We see in our lives that we don't like it when we're reduced to biology. You know, like when we're reduced to just maybe our ethnicity, our skin color, our gender. We don't like those distinctions. Like, I'm more than that. You know, I'm not just my biology. We understand that people are more than their physicality. And if we judge equality by material parameters, we'll see that we're not equal. We're just not by material parameters. But we intrinsically feel that there is something equal, and we all want to be treated equally. And the idea that we should all be equal stems from the idea that there is something more than the body, because it's undeniable that the body is not equal. Like my husband, like no matter how much I go to the gym with him, he's like 100 times stronger than I am. Like our bodies are not equal, and I don't think they could ever be equal. They're just not. But there is something that is equal, and that's our souls. And we have this longing for this. We know this. We need this. Again, this is just our intrinsic knowing that we are actually equal. We're equal. We are. But these vehicles, they may not be in terms of their capabilities. But the soul, what we actually are, we're equal. And that's actually kind of like beautiful and reaffirming, right? Because equality does exist, but we're not going to find it on this bodily platform. But so materialism makes material emotions pointless, right? Why would we lament the destruction, the disorganization of a bag of chemicals? It just, we don't, you know, if it would be easier to accept that we're temporary and it's going to go if we didn't have this eternal component, this eternal part, this eternal engine inside of us. All right, so these next verses are just kind of diffusing those other worldviews. And we'll get more into them. I think there's a couple more that kind of talk to that. Like, it doesn't even make sense for you to feel this way if you don't believe in this worldview. Why are you even lamenting? And we'll go into more of that in the next verses. But that's all for today. Does anybody want to share a reflection or?
Well, you know, I can always make a comment.
Please.
I was going back to the first, I'm not verse, sloka that we read today about changing clothes. the change
Yeah.
of clothes of the soul. I always love that because I think that we have such a culturally a fear of death that is immediately lost when you move to certain levels of enlightenment because this idea becomes a reality. Like, the masters or the sages that are speaking don't fear death because they understand the larger viewpoint that we're changing clothes. And just how wonderful that would be. And I know there's a divine plan, and I'm not saying anything went wrong, but if people understood that, the fear of death would diminish and the experience of life could increase. Like, I have this parentheses in eternity where I'm expressing God in this particular way. And at the end of that time, I change clothes, and then the agony and the suffering. And I'm not saying that I don't miss, like my brother, for example, I don't miss him when he left, but I can celebrate his life differently if I understood that concept.
Hmm.
So that was one of the thoughts that I had about today. And then another idea, I think, Rada, that you threw the, religion versus science challenge out there in a particular way, that if it's believed by the scientific community, then it's real. But I think that, and I don't know why this phrase came, that we hold these truths to be self-evident from the independent. And that's because of our experience and our heart, that we're all equal, that we are all centered in love, that we're all more than our bodies. And that
Mhm.
that idea actually unifies us in humanity, as you were saying. It's like it doesn't need science to prove it. I hope I'm not offending all of our beautiful engineers on the phone, but because we know whether science can prove it or not. I think it's, that beautiful Leela that God gives us, that, that we know ourselves when we know, and we don't need anything to prove it. So I just,
Mm. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. I got into science because I liked that idea that everything was provable, and that made me comfortable. I was so like I wasn't going to believe anything I couldn't see. Like, show me and I'll believe it. If not, I'm not into it. But I think my own evolution, part of my own evolution has been being able to let go of that concept a little bit and be more comfortable with things that metaphysical things that aren't so black and white. And in that I found so much more connection and and fulfillment. So, but I still love science, but
right,
it's not like I wouldn't, that's not the center. It's more just like fun.
right,
But to really think that we can grasp that what only things that are real are things that we can see and prove, it's just so limiting.
yeah,
And when to your point, we already we feel so much more than that. How it's just, yeah. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you.
And oh, Brittany, you asked a question, how does one get out of an animal body?
Mm,
Mercy. And animals are conditioned beings too. So if you're chanting around your animals, if you're elevating their consciousness. So the animals can also come to higher bodies in that way in their next lives. And are you and Veda still going to be in New Vrindavan this weekend? Yes, we're going to be in New Vrindavan. If you want to come see us. And I think I could still get you a room if you want to come and stay there. So DM me if you're interested in that. Oh yeah, you'll be there Saturday. Wonderful. Great. Okay. Anything else before we adjourn?
Hare Krishna.
Hey Krishna, who's saying? Oh, Karina.
Karina, hi. I just wanted to thank you for how you're explaining like the over-identifying with the body, but also always being aware that we must take care of our body. Because I think sometimes in the spiritual world, there can be that spiritual bypassing. You're not the
Mm,
body, you're not the body, but we're still having to take care of our body. Yeah, I think we have to be careful that we don't disown our body when we get down this spiritual path. So thank you for explaining it so beautifully.
oh yeah. Yeah, it's so important. You know, I was practicing yoga one time, Sachinanda Swami. I don't know how many of you guys know him. He's like very evolved Swami. And I was rolling out my mat, and he's kind of mystical. He kind of can like read minds. And I was feeling guilty for like practicing yoga when I felt like I should be doing spiritual practices. And he said, yoga it's not illusion. It's important. And he said that like almost like he was reading my mind. And I was like, yeah, you know, we need to take care of this body. We need to practice yoga or whatever physical thing that we do. But we need to know where our consciousness is, where we're doing it. And that's what's important. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
I was just going to
Anything
say
else? Oh,
that
Nilk. Yeah.
I shut off my camera so that I could do some yoga while I was listening to.
Ah.
Ah! Great. Good. So you're there. You're taking care of your body. That's
thank you.
great. Both at the same time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, I'll see you all Monday. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you so much for your work, your beautiful work. Thank you.
Thank you all for your work, for showing up and going through the process with me.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for your vulnerability and everybody's shares. I really appreciate it. I can relate.
Thank you, Brittany. Love you.
Appreciate it,
guys.
all of you. Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it
Thank
so
you
much.
all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a beautiful retreat this weekend.
Thank you. We'll miss you all.
Uh,
Hopefully you can
miss
come
you
next
too.
time. To come next time, Lisa.